Hello and welcome to this edition of the Caldwell County Schools Profile Show. Today our focus is on embracing different cultures. There'll be two segments in today's show. Our first segment will be Carla Ingram, who's a world history teacher from South Caldwell High School. And our second segment will be a guest that we have from our Ed Center, Jamie Ingle, who's the coordinator of our English Learner Program. But on set with me now is Carla Ingram. And Carla has just come back to the United States from a special trip, and that's what I'd like to talk to her about today. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you very much.
I understand that you were a part of the Fulbright Hayes Scholarship or Scholar Program. Can you tell us a little bit about that program?
Yeah, so Fulbright Hayes was a bill passed in the 60s by Congress to fund teacher professional development in other countries. And so they have a wide range of programs they do. The particular program that I was a part of was through Appalachian State University, and it was called a small group professional development, and specifically on Indonesia, Indonesian culture and history and the arts, with the goal being to take teachers to Indonesia and then for us to learn about it while we were there, but then to bring that back and create lessons and curriculum materials that teachers, not just in Caldwell County, but anybody who can access the internet can use the materials that we create. So.
And it was a collaboration with the Reich College of Education in particular at Appalachian State?
Mm-hmm. Dr. Paul Wallace was the writer of the grant to receive funding from Fulbright Hayes, and he's with the Reich College of Education. And he took 13, there's 13 of us. Some were teacher ed professors at App. Some were just beginning teachers, either just finishing up teacher ed students at App. And then the rest of us are K-12, either music, theater, or history teachers from this part of North Carolina. So.
What piqued your interest in the program and the actual travel, and what encouraged you or caused you to go through the application process?
So I am a firm believer that travel totally changes you. And as a teacher, it's difficult for me to talk about places in the world. I teach world history, so it's not difficult for me to talk about places in the world, but it sure gives me a lot of credibility when I can say, well, I was on the Java Sea, and so I can talk about spice traders who were there in the 1600s, or when I learn about puppetry or textiles, and I can weave that into my class. Having been there completely is a game changer. For me personally, travel changes it, but also for my students. It gives them a window to the world that they would not have otherwise.
Now, Indonesia being the point of travel, was there a reason why the program picked that particular country? And was there something about that country that piqued your interest?
So Dr. Wallace just is a person who had traveled to Indonesia and just fell in love with it because the culture there is so diverse and rich and full, and he also figured that a lot of people in North Carolina or the United States in general just don't know a lot about Indonesia. It's kind of an unusual location, but as far as world history goes, it is a big player in the spice trade and Indian Ocean trade routes. And so for me as a world history teacher, the history of the place is what piqued my interest to go there. I was part of a program through Duke and UNC called Global Islam in the Arts, and that's where I first learned about a style of dance, masked dance in Indonesia. So that piqued my interest, but then it also shows up all throughout my world history curriculum. So using it as a case study in my class, it was it's invaluable to talk about world history as a whole. So.
Now, from your experiences, was there anything that you either saw or that you experienced that really was unexpected that surprised you?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I think that the diversity of I knew I could read on paper that Indonesia is diverse, but being there where it's in front of you and seeing how they handle diversity, they are a nation of 17,000 islands. There are, it's the fourth most populated country in the world. They are the third largest democracy in the world, and they have 300 languages, 700 ethnic groups. It's this really diverse country. And our trip took us to 4 different locations. And so I think the thing that it didn't necessarily surprise me, but I was awakened to just how diverse, but how well that works there. We went from Jakarta in the North Java to the central Java, to Yogyakarta. And Java, the island of Java, is predominantly I guess, majority Muslim. But there are, like I lived with a Catholic family for a week. So so it's lots of religions there, and they just sort of embrace that as part of their culture. But then we went to the island of Bali. Well, it's almost 100% Hindu. But then we went to the island of West Timor, which is had been colonized mostly by the Portuguese, and so it's predominantly Christian. So it was just like this kind of interesting juxtaposition to go from one city to the other to get kind of a whole picture of the country. That was really valuable. So I don't know that it surprised me, but it was probably the most useful way to travel throughout the country. So,
what will you bring back that would show up in your classroom, either as an object or an artifact that you could talk about with students, or maybe it's material that you weave into a lesson plan?
Okay. So a couple ways I think I'll use it. I teach world history, so of course it will show up there. Indonesia, their material culture, so like this is called wayang kulit puppets here, this is wayang golek puppets, and in their puppetry, no matter what religion you are in Indonesia, puppetry is a big part of their culture, and a lot of the stories that show up are Hindu epics that are thousands of years old. So this is Rama, who is the main character from a epic story called the Ramayana. This is also a shadow puppet example, again, also from the Ramayana. And so that will show up when I talk about Hinduism as a religious, I go over all the major religions in world history when they were founded. And so I'll talk about that Hindu epic and talk about how that plays a part in Indonesia. Also, their material culture, as far as weaving their textiles. So in their textiles, protected by UNESCO or recognized by UNESCO as a intangible cultural contribution, is batik, which is a style of textile making. And so even the patterns in their batik fabrics, they reflect the different ways that cultures have, or different people groups that have come through Indonesia. Indonesia is a story of people migrating there. And so I'll use batik to talk about Hindu patterns, Islamic patterns. The Dutch were there for many years, and so the batik is a reflection of the different culture groups that have come through there. So that will show up in my class. But also, I sponsor a club called Citizens of the World, and I would love for my club to then be able to either help do demonstrations to the rest of the school, or even to visit a elementary school class as a connection with our elementary school. So I'm not sure how my club will use it, but I brought back lots of material things that we can share with elementary students. One thing I'm particularly excited about is I brought back an entire set of angklung instruments. I have one here. This is called an angklung. It's made out of bamboo, and the way that you play it is you hold it and then shake it for that note. And so this one is just 1 out of 8. This is the letter, or the note C, the C note. And so I'll be able to use this as a way to teach children simple songs, or even my class, I think my students, when they can have a hands-on experience. But it's made out of bamboo, so it's unique to Indonesia because bamboo is such a big part of their geography. So again, that kind of plays a part in, you use what you have, and so that is a reflection of their culture, using the geography to be a big part of that. So.
And you've just returned from your trip.
Yeah.
This was about a month long?
Yes. I left July 5th and I returned just Friday, so August 2nd. We were there 28 days. We visited Jakarta in the north. It's a city of over 20 million. We visited Yogyakarta, which is in central Java. Then we were in Bali, and then we went to the island of West Timor, up these crazy mountain hills to these far reaches, to these 2 very tiny villages where people still live like they may have lived 100 years ago. It's Fatum Nasi and Boti villages. And so, matter of fact, they are world renowned. The island of West Timor is world renowned for their ikat weaving. And each of us were presented with an ikat scarf, hand woven by the women of the village there. So that'll show up too in talking about culture and heritage in my class. So.
You know a lot. You know a great deal. The words and the different types of objects. How much of that did you know before you went? How much preparation did you have to do on the fly prior to going?
So I knew about Indonesia as far as the history goes, but before we left, we all read a history book about it, and we all read a cultural, kind of an overview cultural book about it. So all of us on the trip, which totally changed your ability to absorb what you were learning. I think if I had gone without any knowledge at all, it would have been very difficult to then absorb it as well. And so I did have to do some reading ahead of time. We also did, while we were there, about 20 hours worth of language study, Bahasa Indonesian. And that completely changed the way that I was able to just barely communicate with people. So I didn't learn enough to have full conversations, but I did learn enough to be able to say hello or say good morning or talk to somebody in the market, which once you do that, that breaks down a cultural barrier. When you make the effort in another country to say hello or to say good morning in their language, it builds a bridge between you and them that when you don't make that effort, that you aren't building that connection. So that was a pretty big deal. So.
No question in my mind that you'll make this come to life for students.
Thank you.
As a veteran teacher, and you mentioned to me that you're working on national boards in the coming year, you take an activity like this that's overseas travel, that's a month in length, that's much different than what traditional professional development would be. From your viewpoint, being a veteran educator, why is continuous learning and professional development, an activity like this or something on a smaller scale, important for you in your continual professional growth?
Wow, that's a really great question. I am a firm believer that nobody should ever quit learning. I mean, I feel like that our job as educators is to constantly tell our students to be lifelong learners. And so as a teacher, I should, for one, model that. I should always be reading something new or having conversations with my teammates in the Freshman Academy, for example, at South, or I should always be, seeking out opportunities to do webinars or and for example, this is pretty extreme to do a month-long overseas trip, but there's lots of opportunities like this for teachers. I work with the Area Studies program in Chapel Hill, Duke Chapel Hill area, and I'm constantly on listservs to get lists of ways that teachers can do free PD that they may not know about if you're not on the right listserv. What keeps it, like I've been teaching for 19 years, and what keeps it fresh is things like this. Like I have known I was going to be a teacher since 3rd grade. I mean, this is my calling. It's not like a job for me. But if you only ever just show up every day and I teach world history every year, it can really get stagnant if you're not careful. But constantly finding ways to sort of learn something new yourself. Every time you learn something new, that immediately has effect on how enthusiastic you are about it in your class, or how you maybe can present something differently to a student to wake them up to be excited about something. I mean, the more I know about this, who knows what, I mean, maybe there's a student in my class who ends up studying Indonesia in college because they learned about it from me, and if I'd never gone, then they may not have been had their interest piqued. So I feel like my learning is a direct impact on how students get excited about history. So anyway.
Well, we thank you for making those efforts and taking that time.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today
Thank
and
you.
sharing that information.
Yeah, thank you. It's a joy to be here. So.
For our viewers, we want to invite you to come back for segment 2. Jamie Ingle, the coordinator of our English Learner Program, will be here. Welcome back to segment 2 of the Caldwell County Schools Profile. Joining me on the set now is the coordinator of the English Learner Program with the Caldwell County Schools, Jamie Ingle. Jamie, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Now the program, just in the 26 years that I've been in education, has had a variety of names. It's been known as the English as a Second Language, English Language Learner. It's now English Learner. The names have changed. Have the delivery and the types of services that the program provides changed very much over the years?
No, the types of service, it's exactly the same. And I get confused sometimes, and I still call it by its old name, and I forget we have a new name. But the name keeps evolving to reflect the type of student that we have, but the service that we provide is pretty much the same.
And how would you describe that for our viewers, the services that are provided through the program?
For Caldwell County Schools, we have an English as Second Language program, and that is a supplemental program. It implies that there is a first language, and the first language, of course, is Spanish. That's the language that the children bring, or it might be Egyptian, Hindu. They have a first language. We teach them the second language, which is English. But one thing that everyone misunderstands is that we don't teach them in their native language. We're teaching them all English. They are in the regular English program first, and then they're with our supplemental program second. And we pull them out. Sometimes we go into class with them. Sometimes we offer a completely separate class. So we have many different ways that we serve them based on their needs.
Now, how is a student identified to be a part of the program?
Every student who enrolls in Caldwell County School has to complete a home language survey, and if any answer on that survey is anything other than English all the way down the line, that application or that survey is pulled out, and we then administer a screener to all of the students who have another language on their home language survey. If the student reaches a certain proficiency level on the screener, we say goodbye, and they are integrated into the mainstream program. If they score a little bit lower, then that means they need extra support in learning English, and that's where our program kicks in.
And how many students roughly are we serving in Caldwell County at this point?
Well, that's where it gets a little tricky because of all those labels that you called. We have about 1,000 students who speak a language other than English, but they're not all in our program. We have about 400 who are what we consider limited proficiency. They're still in the process of learning English. We have maybe 300 more who have exited our program, but they still need to be monitored. And then there are probably a couple of hundred more that have exited and they've moved on and are fully integrated. So.
And there are a number of students that we deal with, as you mentioned, through the program, but we're not teaching them in their native language. I think that's a misconception that you mentioned earlier. But they do very well in terms of testing. When you look at what our test scores look like,
They are awesome.
We boast a very strong performance. What would you attribute that to?
I think that, first of all, they get a very good sound basic education in our school system. And then I like to give credit to the ESL teachers because they are all over every single one of these students. They're monitoring their progress. They're going in when they see a child has a weakness, and they address that weakness and then send the child back into class, and they're able to move on. So I think it's just a partnership, a collaboration between the ESL teachers and the classroom teachers. One thing that always fascinates me, all students learn language. It's a human thing. We all learn to speak language, and all of our English learners will learn to speak English with no ESL teacher. But what the ESL teacher does is they really get in there and dig down deep to the academic language. And that is the language that's not acquired. No one walks around talking about photosynthesis, but the ESL teacher can talk about photosynthesis and help that student learn what that is. So then they go back into class and they're ready to hear the discussion and to take in the instruction. So
the model that's being followed, would that be considered an immersion model of language?
For the most part, we do immerse our students in the English language. They are with their English-speaking teachers all day long, almost every single day. We do pull the students out for 20 to 30 minutes, 2 or 3, maybe more times a week, just to give them that supplemental support. But for the most part, they are immersed in the language, and it's fascinating to watch the learning. And I get a big kick out of it. And it's amazing what our students have been able to do. I saw a Facebook post just over the weekend. One of my very first students who did not know any English, and she was from China. She is now an international attorney in Hong Kong. And she started with not a word of English here, and now she's working in this high-level job. speaking both languages. And it's just an amazing thing to know what she learned in a short amount of time. We have another little boy that I was talking to the other day. He's from Vietnam, and he came last year, and already he's fluent in English. He learned that quickly. It's amazing.
Do you know how many languages we're dealing with in terms of students that are represented in our county?
Right now, out of our limited learners, we have about 14 languages. If you take in the ones that have exited our program, we probably have 24 different languages represented in Caldwell County, right here in Caldwell County. It's amazing.
And I'm sure for every student it's different. They come from unique situations, but for some it's a hurdle, and for others it's more of an obstacle, the language component. Just in general terms, how long would a typical student who's coming in that has language as a barrier, how long would it take them to be in a situation where they're comfortable in terms of being able to understand and respond to English in the classroom?
It's a very typical process. It's predictable in the most part. If a student comes with no language, and let's say we enroll them in kindergarten and they have no English language, they're normally proficient by 4th to 5th grade. Some students learn a little bit more slowly and some learn a little bit more rapidly, but for the most part, it'll take 4 to 5 years to get that academic language down. Now, the ones who struggle the most are the older students who come into high school at the age of 15, 16, 17, and they have no English. They struggle. That is a struggle because they are expected to meet all the same expectations and requirements that every other high school student in that building is expected to meet. And the timeline is the same. And so they're having to process and learn English. At the same time, they're trying to learn American history. And it just takes some time. And also the social element starts to play in greater at the upper levels. When they're in kindergarten, they don't even notice differences. But when you get in high school, the cliques and groups are established, and it's harder to integrate into that group. So I think our older students have a harder time.
And I would think family outreach will be a very important part of the program.
Yes, we have 4 bilingual assistants who help us with that part, and we have great relationships with most of our parents, and we've tried to establish different groups for them where they can be a part or have meetings where they can come and learn more about what they need to know to support their kids in school. The family engagement is huge. And one thing that strikes me about the families, even though the parents may not speak English, they are so determined to see that their children receive the education that we have to offer, that they sit and listen and look through that little book bag and look at all those papers, even though they may not understand a word, but their kids know every day when they get home, they're going to show mom and dad what they did at school. And so the children are sometimes teaching the parents English, and it's just an amazing thing.
And what are the funding sources for the program?
We receive some funding from the federal government, we receive some funding from the state, and then we receive most of our funding from the local government.
What about community resources and support that exist?
The biggest support they have is their faith community. They depend on that for their information a lot of times. We do have 2 businesses here in town that are great supports that I know of. One is Multi-Services in Granite Falls, and another Concilio Hispano in Lenore. And they provide services to the family as far as translating, making sure the documentation is appropriate, and just taking care of general business. So we have those. And then a lot of our churches, the English-speaking churches, also send groups and offer tutoring. We have a great partnership with the community college. We are about to start an ESL class for parents at Granite Falls Elementary. So we keep trying to provide opportunities, and sometimes the parents ask us for things. And so we listen to what they say so that we can offer them what they need to be engaged. And one of the things one group of parents wanted to do at Davenport was a book they had a book group, and they would read a book and come in. We'd have a little book study right there with our Spanish-speaking moms. So lots of different ways that we try to reach out.
We thank you for your leadership. We thank you for the program and just the services it provides to our students.
I love it.
And
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. That wraps up segment 2. Again, we thank you for joining us today for this edition of Profiles. We hope you have a wonderful summer.